Hello, hello. We are going to watch a overview of the first half of the Gospel according to Luke. The video is done by the Bible Project. They're a non-profit organization that try to make the Bible accessible and easily readable for anyone. So let's go and see.
The Gospel according to Luke. It's one of the earliest accounts of Jesus' life, and it's actually part one of a unified two-volume work, Luke Acts. If you compare the opening lines of both of these books, it's clear that they come from the same author. And there are internal clues in the book of Acts, as well as an early tradition that identifies the author as Luke, the traveling companion and co-worker of Paul the Apostle, who we know was also a doctor. Luke opens his work with a preface telling us how and why he wrote this book. He acknowledges that there's many other fine accounts of Jesus' life out there, but he wanted to go back to the eyewitness traditions of as many early disciples as he could, in order to produce what he calls an orderly account about the things that have been fulfilled among us. Now, that word fulfilled shows us why Luke wrote this account. For him, the story of Jesus isn't just ancient history. He wants to show how it's the fulfillment of the long covenant story of God and Israel, and bigger than that, of the story of God in the whole world. The book's design is fairly clear. There's a long introduction that sets up the stories of John the Baptist and Jesus. Then in chapters 3 to 9, Luke presents a robust portrait of Jesus and his mission in his home region of Galilee. After that, the large midsection of the book is Jesus' long journey to Jerusalem, which leads to the story's climax, Jesus' final week in Jerusalem leading up to his death and resurrection, which then leads on into the book of Acts. In this video, we're just going to focus on the first half of Luke's gospel. The extended introduction tells in parallel the birth stories of John the Baptist and Jesus. So you have this elderly priestly couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and then this young unmarried woman, Mary and Joseph. They both receive an unlikely divine promise that they're going to have a son. Both
So the angel came to, I believe, Mary and then Zachariah. Isn't funny? Every time an angel comes to say the same line, be not afraid, something along there. Don't think they're saying it for no reason. Not sure about you, but if an angel suddenly appeared in my room while I was sleeping, cooking, I just doing any activity for that matter, I would probably be freaked out. I'm assuming their form is different from our form. So it is something that might be concerning, especially when you I think it's Ezekiel when you talk about biblical accurate angels. They're very unique and different from us in I guess the way they're designed. So it will freak somebody out. It'll freak me out. But
promises
you
are fulfilled then, as John and then Jesus are born, and both parents sing poems of celebration. Now, these poetic songs, they're filled with echoes from the Old Testament, Psalms and prophets, showing how these children will fulfill God's ancient promises. But
so the Bible is a unified story. Oop, my laptop about to die. Let me charge it really quick. But yeah, the Bible is a unified story that tells Jesus, that leads to Jesus. So it's a very good idea to go back and read the Old Testament. It's not a covenant that we are currently under, but you do need to know the Old Testament to get the full context of the New Testament. It's a continuation of the story. It's like picking up Game of Thrones, and I actually don't know the book order, but let's say you pick up Game of Thrones where John and Daenerys finally meet, blah blah blah. He's like, who's this guy? Why is she trying to get the Iron Throne? Is she like good? Is she bad? You don't know because you didn't read the backstory. So, Old Testament backstory you need to read.
these poems
Oh,
also preview each child's role in the story to follow. So John is the prophetic messenger.
there's a mirror story. You have Abraham and Sarah, very old couple. They didn't have any children. I think Abraham thought one of his servants was going to inherit everything in his household because he didn't have any. He didn't have any children, but then God blessed him with Isaac, and the parallel similar with Elizabeth, Zachariah, and John. Old couple, no child. God blessed them with the messenger, John, to prepare the way.
Messenger promised in the Torah and the prophets who's going to prepare Israel to meet their God. And Jesus, he's the messianic king promised to David, who's going to bring God's reign over Israel and God's blessing to the nations, just like he promised to Abraham. After this, Mary brings Jesus to the Jerusalem temple for his dedication, and two elderly prophets, Anna and Simeon, they see Jesus and they recognize who he
Another
is.
typical.
And Simeon sings his own song, a poem inspired by the prophet Isaiah. He says, "This child is God's salvation for Israel, and he will become a light to the nations." So with all this anticipation, the story moves forward into the next main section, where Luke presents Jesus and his mission. He sets the stage with John's renewal movement at the Jordan River, where he's calling a new, repentant, recommitted Israel into existence through baptism. He's preparing for the arrival of God's kingdom. And then Jesus appears as the leader of this.
This is off topic, but Jesus said something a while ago that had me thinking. The kingdom of heaven is in your midst. That puzzles me sometimes. It's like we're here on earth, but by living a life like Jesus, loving your God, loving your neighbor, you can experience Jesus' kingdom. Mind, human knowledge, meh. God knowledge.
New Israel, and he's marked out by the Spirit and the voice of God from heaven. He is the beloved Son of God. After this, Luke follows with the genealogy, and it traces Jesus' origins back to David, then back to Abraham, and then all the way back to Adam from the book of Genesis. Luke's claiming here that Jesus is the messianic king of Israel who will bring God's blessing, but not only to Israel, the family of Abraham. He is here for all the sons of Adam, for all humanity.
So I'm not big on genealogy, but I think we all know Adam, Eve started all the fallen man. So you have Adam, Abraham, King David, and Jesus. He's part of the lineage. The Bible is really good for tracking lineages and names. So it's here.
After this, Luke has strategically placed the story of Jesus going to his hometown Nazareth, where he launches his public mission. At a synagogue gathering, Jesus stands up and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah, saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor and freedom for the prisoners, new sight for the blind and freedom for the oppressed." Now, along with the other Gospels, Jesus is presented here. He's the Messianic King bringing the good news of God's kingdom. But what Luke uniquely highlights are the social implications of Jesus' mission. So he brings freedom. The Greek word is aphesis. It literally means release, and it refers to
Freedom means a basis in Greece. Learn something new.
the ancient Jewish practice of the year of Jubilee described in Leviticus 25. It's when all
You know, Leviticus is an interesting book. I think it's the third book in the Torah. I think it skipped a lot because it has culturally outdated practices that we might find odd, like animal sacrifices. Some part of me read them like, whoa, why are you killing an animal? Why are you sacrificing an animal? I think it was to act of cleansing sins. Could be wrong, but we will get to that.
Israelite slaves were released, when people's debts were canceled, when
Sorry. I think slaves is another topic in the Bible that will get people slightly riled up. You hear slave, and depending on your race or where you grew up, you might think, the Bible promotes slavery, that the Bible is used to control slaves. But if you read the book, get to know God's character, and just spend some time with the word, you'll see slaves was a different context back in biblical times, and God meets people where they are to say, oh, the Israelites have slaves, that's wrong, let's take it away. Every group of people Every person has like their own sense something they're struggling with. I think God meets people. Oh, it's bright outside. God meets people where they're at, and He calls them to change over time. So I think the whole argument that the Bible endorses slaves is not necessarily a good one. You might notice my S's. I haven't been saying S's with a plural. I was overseas in Southeast Asia and they don't have S's. And I guess over time I picked up on the habit of not using the letter S. If I say like, oh, I want some eggs, I want eggs.
Land that was sold is returned back to families. It's all a symbolic reenactment of God's liberating justice and mercy. And then Jesus says that this good news of release is specifically for the poor. Now, in the Old Testament, the poor, or in Hebrew, ani, it's a much broader.
Learn something new. The word poor is amni in Hebrew. Amni? Amni. Amni.
Category than just people who don't have very much money. It refers also to people of low social status in their culture, like people with disabilities or women and children and the elderly. It also can include social outsiders, like people of other ethnic groups or people whose poor life choices have placed them outside acceptable religious circles. And Jesus says that God's kingdom is especially good news for these people. So after this, Luke immediately puts in front of us a large block of stories, showing us what Jesus' good news for the poor looks like. It involves the healing of a bedridden sick woman, or a man who has a skin disease, or someone who's paralyzed. There are stories here also about Jesus welcoming into his community a tax collector like Levi, who's not
Hmm. Levite. If I'm not mistaken, Levite is disciple Matthew. Could be wrong, but I think it's disciple Matthew. There's a show called The Chosen. It's about the life of Jesus from the people closest to him, disciples, friends, family. I think Levi slash Matthew's in it, the tax collector. In the show, they made him on the spectrum. Not sure if it's accurate historically, but that's what they did. It's a good show. You should watch it.
financially poor, but he is a social outsider. There's a story about Jesus forgiving a prostitute. Luke showing us how
Jesus forgave a prostitute. Oh my. Sorry, I shouldn't be joking. But yeah, it's weird. Our generation is hung up on certain things, and I think one of it is the OF only blink. I think if a girl or guy from that is on OnlyFans, the first thing you can do, oh, you're gonna burn, you're going to HELL, you sold your soul, blah blah blah. I don't know if Jesus take that approach with these people. I think he would lead them to repentance out of love. He probably will guide them to let them know through discernment that their actions may not be honoring God, and He will show them how to love the way, the truth, and light, which is through Him, His teachings. But I don't know if He will be shaming the people doing OF work the way we do as society. I don't know if it's helpful the way we're doing it. Um, if it's not out of love, if you haven't prayed about it and you're just angry, maybe it may not be the best idea for you personally to try to convince that person to leave that lifestyle. I think after some prayer, reflection, and God opens your heart, maybe you can do it out of love, but I don't know. Don't think that's my ministry to touch on that.
how Jesus' kingdom brought restoration and reversal of people's whole life circumstances. He's expanding the circle of people who get invited in to discover the healing power of God's kingdom. And as Jesus' mission attracts a large following, he does something even more provocative. He forms these people into a new Israel by appointing over them the 12.
He wants people to know Israel. Huh. I think that is interesting because we get caught up a lot of times. What race was Jesus? Was he black? Was he white? Was he Hispanic? Was he Asian? Or was he Indian? Was he Middle Eastern? Was he whatever race? And don't think it matters. Really good coffee. Jesus didn't come for one race. He came for the human race. So whether or not Jesus was your race, I don't think that's an important thing to worry about. Yes, have people throughout history distorted Jesus' race for their own benefit, gain? Yeah, probably. But that shouldn't matter because it's people taking the word and using it in a corrupted way and not the word itself.
12 disciples as leaders corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. And then Jesus teaches his manifesto of an upside down kingdom, or as Luke calls it, the sermon given on the plain.
Right.
He says God's love for the outsider and the poor means that his kingdom brings a reversal of all of our value systems. He is here to form a new alternative people of God who are going to respond to Jesus' invitation by practicing radical generosity, by serving the poor. People who are going to lead by serving and live by peacemaking and forgiveness. People who are deeply pious but who reject religious hypocrisy. Now, Jesus' radical kingdom vision, his claim to divine authority, it starts to generate resistance and controversy, especially from Israel's religious leaders. His outreach to questionable people, it's a threat to their religious traditions and their sense of social stability. And so,
bingo. The religious leaders was upset with Jesus because it disrupted their power balance. I think as Christians, we do a lot of things that are tradition, that's not necessarily biblical, but it just kind of got mixed in. Don't want to get political, but let's take guns, for example. I feel like conservatism, Christianity, and guns just get mixed in for each other. I'm not sure where the right to bear arms is in the Bible. I don't think it's a bad thing unless you're using it for evil. But I don't know. I just think we need to start to separate personal values, culture values from Christian values because a lot of times just get mixed in.
they start accusing Jesus of blaspheming God, of being a drunk and mixing with sinners. And so this section culminates in a new revelation of Jesus' mission to his disciples. He says that, yes, he is the Messianic king, and that he's going to assert his reign over Israel by dying in Jerusalem, by becoming the suffering servant king of Isaiah 53, who dies for the sins of.
They mentioned dying. Don't want to be a spoiler, but Jesus does die, then comes back, which is good for us. But there's an interesting thing about that. Who's willing to die for their friends? You do a lot for your friends. Oh, somebody is calling me.